What if a court ruling could hold social media companies responsible for how their platforms are designed? What if a political standoff could lead to airport security lines stretching up to 4 hours? And what if a voting law debate could directly impact national security funding? These aren't hypothetical questions. They are real legal battles happening right now in courts and government across the country. That's what we are breaking down today on Wall on Law. Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of Wall on Law. My name is Jonas Wall, and I am a pre-law student at the University of Delaware. On this podcast, we cover what's happening across the country in law and policy and how it affects your daily life. Today, we are looking at two major legal updates. First, we are returning to a story that we've been covering in both episode 6 and 7, and now in episode 8, we finally have an answer. A jury has found Meta and Google liable for how their platforms are designed, and we will break down what that means for the future of social media. Then we'll turn to the ongoing Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, crisis, including the government shutdown, and emergency action to restore TSA pay, growing airport delays, and how a political fight over the Save America Act is directly shaping national security funding. First, let's cover a major update to a trial involving Instagram, YouTube, and a young California woman, along with a separate trial involving Meta. To briefly recap, in episode 6, we discussed an ongoing trial where the plaintiff, Kaylee GM, argued that social media companies should be held liable not for user content, but for how their platforms are designed. On Wednesday, March 25th, a Los Angeles jury found Meta Platforms, which owns Instagram, and Google, which owns YouTube, liable or legally responsible for a young woman's depression and suicidal thoughts after she said that she became addicted to their platforms at a young age. The total amount in damages is $6 million, with Meta responsible for $4.2 million and Google responsible for $1.8 million. That money is split between compensatory damages, which are meant to make up for harm suffered, and punitive damages, which are meant to punish the companies and discourage similar conduct in the future. All of the money goes directly to the plaintiff, Kaylee GM. At the same time, just one day earlier, on March 24th, a separate jury in New Mexico ordered Meta to pay $375 million after finding the company misled users about the safety of its products for young users and failed to protect children on its platforms. This case was different in a few key ways. It was brought by the New Mexico Attorney General, meaning the state was the plaintiff. And because this was a state lawsuit, the money is paid to the state of New Mexico, not to an individual victim. But despite those differences, both cases revolve around the same core issue: whether tech companies can be held legally responsible for how their platforms are designed and how those design choices impact users. Additionally, both of these verdicts tie directly back to Section 230, which has been an evolving theme across the past few episodes. To briefly recap, in episode 7, we discussed how the US Senate was debating whether to end Section 230 or keep it. And now, with these verdicts, we are continuing to see that debate play out not just in Congress, but in the courts as well. At the center of that debate is Section 230. Section 230 has long protected tech companies from being held liable for content posted by their users, and that protection has acted as a major barrier to lawsuits like these. But in both of these recent cases, that barrier was sidestepped. Instead of arguing that harmful content caused the damage, Kaylee GM and New Mexico argued that the platforms themselves, like the design features, infinite scroll, and addictive algorithms, caused damage to users. And that separation is critical, because now that the courts are accepting that argument, Section 230 may not apply in the same way it has been for the past 3 decades. Meta and Google still deny that their platforms are harmful and are expected to appeal these decisions. But even with those appeals, these verdicts signal a shift. And this shift isn't that Section 230 is gone, but that its limits are now being tested in a much more serious way. These rulings also have broader implications. There are currently thousands of similar lawsuits pending against companies like Meta, Google, Snapchat, and TikTok in both state and federal courts. And these recent rulings could strengthen the claims of plaintiffs bringing those lawsuits. And these cases may extend beyond social media. Legal experts have suggested that these cases can also be applied to holding other online platforms liable for their design, including gaming sites like Roblox. As said by Eric Goldman, co-director of the High Tech Law Institute at Santa Clara University School of Law, I think the internet is on trial, not social media. Now, even though we have these verdicts, the legal process is far from over. With appeals expected to be filed by both Meta and Google, they will likely focus on Section 230 and whether it should still shield companies from these types of claims. So, these next stages could be even more important than the trial itself. And if appellate courts take up the issue, there is a real possibility that this question could eventually reach the Supreme Court of the United States. So, why does this matter to you? Because this isn't just about one lawsuit or one company. It's about whether tech companies can be held liable not just for what appears on their platforms, but how those platforms are built in the first place. And that directly affects you. Every time you open your phone, scroll through Instagram, or watch videos on YouTube, you are interacting with systems that are designed to keep you there as long as possible, which, if you've ever said just one more video, you already know it's working. If courts keep moving in this direction, companies may have to rethink how those systems work, from how content is recommended to what protections are put in place for users. So, this isn't just about social media companies. It's about the future of how you experience the internet every day. Now, let's cover the major TSA issues affecting airports across the country. On February 2nd, 2026, the federal government entered a partial shutdown due to a failure to pass funding legislation. The next day, on February 3rd, a funding package restored most government operations, but it did not restore funding for key Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, agencies like TSA. Without funding, the TSA's ability to enforce airport security has greatly diminished. Now, government shutdowns like these happen when both parties can't agree on major policy issues. It's no different here. Democrats in the U.S. Senate are refusing to fund the Department of Homeland Security unless there are changes to immigration enforcement rules, following highly debated incidents in Minneapolis where federal agents shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens. Republicans, on the other hand, have rejected proposals to fund TSA as they are negotiating over those policies. While this government shutdown has continued, nearly 50,000 TSA agents have been working without pay, and as a result, 460 airport security officers have quit, with many others calling out sick because they cannot afford rent, food, or gas. Some TSA agents have even taken on side jobs, like driving for Uber or Lyft, just to make ends meet. As TSA staffing levels drop, the impact became visible at airports across the country. Lines stretched to some of the longest in the agency's history, reaching nearly 4 hours in certain locations, which is longer than some flights. In some major airports, including New York's JFK, Houston, Atlanta, and New Orleans, more than 30% of TSA officers have been absent from work on certain days. With more than 30% of TSA officers absent, hundreds of ICE agents have been deployed to 14 U.S. airports to help manage security lines and assist with operations. It's important to note that while TSA officers had been working without pay, ICE and other law enforcement personnel within DHS were still being paid. These problems have been made even worse by the spring break travel surge, as millions of travelers are flying at the same time, putting additional pressure on an already strained system. But in a major development, on Friday, March 27th, President Donald Trump signed an emergency order directing DHS to begin paying TSA workers using alternate funds. According to DHS, these workers could begin receiving checks as early as Monday. However, that executive action only addresses TSA pay and does not fix the broader DHS shutdown or the ongoing congressional standoff. The Senate passed a bill funding most of the Department of Homeland Security, excluding ICE and parts of Customs and Border Protection. But the House rejected that proposal and instead passed a separate 60-day funding bill that includes all DHS agencies, sending the issue back to the Senate with no resolution yet. Clearly, there's a lot of issues being argued on both sides of the aisle, but there's one issue in particular that I want to focus on. If you remember episode 3, I covered the Save America Act, which would increase verification required for U.S. citizens to cast a ballot during federal elections. That same bill is now playing a role in this TSA shutdown. Over the past week, President Donald Trump has stated that Republicans should not reach an agreement on funding the Department of Homeland Security until Democrats in Congress pass the Save America Act. He has even gone as far as to say that passing the voter bill is far more important than anything else on the Senate's agenda, including DHS funding. The president has also threatened to withhold his signature from any other legislation until Congress passes the Save America Act. So at this point, what started as a funding disagreement has turned into a much larger political standoff. And as the shutdown continues, these issues are likely to get worse. So why does this matter to you? Because this isn't just a political fight happening in Washington. It's something you can feel in real time. If traveling, this could mean waiting hours just to get through security, missing flights, or dealing with overcrowded airports during one of the busiest time travel periods of the year. But beyond that, it raises a bigger question about how government decisions affect everyday systems that people rely on. TSA is one of the most visible parts of the federal government. It's something millions of people interact with every single day. And when funding fights break down the system, you can see the consequences. In other words, this is about more than airport security. It's about how political decisions translate into real-world impacts on your time and your travel. And that brings us to the big picture. Across both of these stories, we are not looking at separate legal issues. In the first case, it's about whether tech companies can be held accountable for how the platforms are designed and the impact those design choices have on millions of users. In the other case, it's about how decisions made in Washington can directly affect systems that people rely on every single day, like airport security. But when you zoom out, both of these stories are really asking the same question. Who is responsible when large systems start to fail? And what role does the law play in stepping in? Because in both cases, you have systems that are incredibly powerful and deeply rooted in everyday life. Social media platforms shape how people communicate, how information spreads, and how much time people spend online. At the same time, government agencies like TSA are responsible for maintaining airport security that millions of people depend on, especially during moments like major travel periods. And when those systems don't function properly, whether it's because of design choices or political gridlock, the effects aren't invisible. They show up in how long you spend on your phone. They show up in how long you wait in the airport line. And they show up in how much control you actually have over systems that are a part of your everyday life. So across all these stories, the law isn't just reacting to one-off problems. This is about holding powerful systems accountable when they affect millions of people at once. And that's something that's not going away anytime soon. Before we close out, I want to say thank you for listening to the 8th episode of Wall on Law. If this episode helped make the law feel a little easier, that's the goal of this podcast. Make sure to follow or subscribe to Wall on Law so you don't miss future episodes. And you can also sign up for our email list at wallonlaw.com to get notified whenever a new episode drops. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Wall on Law.